Maya Johnson stood at the edge of her world, the floor-to-ceiling windows of her Manhattan penthouse framing a view of Central Park that shimmered with autumn's golden hues. Below, couples strolled hand in hand, their laughter drifting up like a melody she could no longer sing. At 42, Maya, a Black American woman with a spirit once as vibrant as the Harlem jazz clubs she loved, felt her soul shrinking under the weight of a marriage that was no marriage at all. For 14 months, 3 weeks, and 5 days, she had counted time not in seasons or sunsets, but in the quiet rejections that chipped away at her heart. Each morning brought another reminder of her invisibility to Ethan Caldwell, her husband, a 44-year-old white American billionaire whose steel-gray eyes never lingered on her for more than a moment. Their union was a contract, not a covenant, a meticulously drafted agreement that promised financial security in exchange for her role as the perfect wife. Maya had signed it to save her mother, Lorraine, whose mounting medical bills threatened to swallow their family home in Brooklyn. Her first marriage to Jamal had ended in financial ruin and emotional scars, a brutal but honest pain. This, though, was different. A slow suffocation, like drowning in a sea of marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The penthouse, with its sleek furniture and priceless art, was a monument to Ethan's wealth, but it felt like a mausoleum, cold and lifeless despite its perfection. Maya's fingers traced the edge of a notebook on the windowsill, its pages yellowed with neglect. Before Ethan, she had been a writer, pouring her heart into stories of Black women who fought for their dreams against all odds. One story about a woman who forgot how to hope once made her writing group weep. Now, the pen felt foreign in her hand, her creativity buried under the weight of playing Mrs. Caldwell. She hadn't written in over a year, and the loss of that part of herself stung as sharply as Ethan's indifference. The Caldwell Group contract needs to be signed by noon. Ethan's voice cut through the morning silence, crisp and businesslike, as if addressing a boardroom rather than his wife. He stood in the doorway, his tailored Armani suit accentuating his broad shoulders and sharp jawline. His silver-flecked dark hair and chiseled features made him undeniably handsome, but his beauty was untouchable, like a sculpture behind glass. Maya didn't turn from the window. She knew the scene by heart. Ethan, already scrolling through his phone, treating their home like a hotel lobby where their paths briefly crossed. "Of course," she replied, her voice carefully neutral, a skill honed over months of swallowing her longing for a good morning, or a "how are you" that carried genuine care. Their marriage contract was explicit. No emotional involvement, physical intimacy, or pretense of love. She had agreed to those terms, believing she could trade her heart for stability, her mother's health, and the Brooklyn brownstone filled with memories of her grandmother's laughter. But 14 months had taught her the difference between surviving and living, and surviving was no longer enough. Ethan lingered, his fingers tightening briefly on the handle of a locked drawer in his desk. Maya caught the movement, a flicker of something unguarded in his usually composed demeanor. She wondered, not for the first time, what lay behind that lock. What pain or secret made him so determined to keep her at arm's length? But he said nothing, only gathered his briefcase and announced, "I'll be in Boston until Wednesday. Morrison will brief you on the charity gala on Thursday." The words were a schedule, not a conversation, another item on a to-do list that included board meetings and dry cleaning, but never her. Maya turned to face him, her deep brown eyes searching his face for a hint of the man she'd hoped he could be. "Will you stay at the Four Seasons?" she asked, though she knew the answer. He always did. Ordered room service, worked until midnight, and never called her once. "Yes," he said, glancing up briefly. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting moment, Maya felt a spark of hope. Maybe he'd see her, really see her, as more than a contractual obligation. But his gaze slid back to his screen, and the moment vanished. Traffic's heavy. "I should go," he said, heading for the door. "Ethan," she called, her voice sharper than intended. He paused, hand on the knob. The word she wanted to scream. "See me, ask me how I'm feeling, treat me like I'm more than a business asset," burned in her chest. Instead, she said, "Have a safe flight." He nodded, polite and distant, and was gone. The silence that followed was heavier than the penthouse's marble floors. Maya sank onto a velvet sofa, pulling her silk robe tighter as if it could hold her together. She was 42, living a life that sparkled from the outside but felt like a prison within. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend, Aisha. "Coffee today? You sound like you need it." Maya stared at the message, picturing Aisha's warm smile and paint-splattered overalls. Aisha, a painter who'd fought through Brooklyn's art scene, knew Maya before she became Mrs. Caldwell, before she traded her dreams for security. She thought of her life before this marriage. A cramped Brooklyn apartment, late nights writing by candlelight when the power was cut, the constant worry over Lorraine's hospital bills. It had been hard, frightening even, but it had been hers. She'd laughed freely, dreamed boldly, and believed her stories could change the world. Now, she had everything money could buy, and nothing her heart craved. The notebook on the windowsill seemed to call her, a reminder of the woman she'd been. She picked it up, flipping to a page where she'd written. She stood at the edge of her life, waiting for someone to pull her back. But no one came, so she learned to save herself. Maya typed back to Aisha, "Yes, I need to get out of here." As she headed to her bedroom to dress, she caught her reflection in a gilded mirror. Her mahogany skin glowed under the soft lighting, her curls impeccably styled, her body draped in designer silk. She was the picture of elegance, but her eyes were hollow, carrying the loneliness of being unseen by the one person whose gaze mattered most. At 42, she was living a fairy tale that felt like a nightmare, and for the first time, she wondered if she dared to rewrite the ending. Maya sat in her private study, a small room tucked away from the penthouse's sterile grandeur, clutching the worn notebook she'd found by the window. Its pages, filled with her handwritten stories, smelled faintly of ink and memory, transporting her back to a life she barely recognized. Before Ethan, before the marriage contract that bound her to a role she never wanted, she had been a writer, weaving tales that captured the resilience of women who refused to break. One story, scrawled in her looping script, told of a woman who forgot how to hope but found it again in the ashes of her past. Maya's chest tightened reading it now, the words a mirror to her fading spirit. She hadn't touched a pen in over a year, her creativity silenced by the demands of being Mrs. Caldwell. The study was her only sanctuary, a space Ethan rarely entered. Its shelves held books she loved: Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, Octavia Butler, authors whose voices had once inspired her own. She traced the spine of "Their Eyes Were Watching God," remembering late nights in her Brooklyn apartment, scribbling stories by candlelight when the power was cut. That life had been messy, precarious, but it had been hers. She'd laughed with friends, dreamed of seeing her name on a bookstore shelf, and believed her words could spark change. Now, her days were filled with charity luncheons and social functions, each a performance that drained her soul. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A text from Aisha glowed on the screen. "Coffee at our old spot? You sound off, girl." Aisha's words carried the warmth of their college days, when they'd shared cheap wine and big dreams. Maya writing stories, Aisha painting canvases that captured the vibrancy of Brooklyn streets. Despite the odds, Aisha had fought through the art world, and her paintings now hang in local galleries. Maya envied her friend's fire, her refusal to let the world dim her light. She typed back, "Yes, I need to breathe," and I felt a flicker of anticipation, like the first note of a song she'd forgotten how to sing. Dressing in a simple sweater and jeans, clothes she kept hidden like relics of her true self, Maya left the penthouse and took the subway to Brooklyn. The familiar rumble of the train soothed her, its rhythm a reminder of the life she'd left behind. She stepped off at her old stop, the air thick with the scent of street food and the hum of neighborhood life. Kids played basketball in a nearby court, their shouts mingling with the jazz drifting from an open window. This was the Brooklyn she'd loved, chaotic and alive, so different from the polished silence of Manhattan. At the cozy cafe where she and Aisha used to spend hours, Maya found her friend waiting at a corner table, paint-splattered overalls and a bright headscarf, making her stand out like a beacon. Aisha's smile was wide, but softened with concern, as she stood to hug her. "You look like you're carrying the world, Maya," she said, her voice rich with the cadence of their shared history. They ordered coffee, the barista's banter a comforting backdrop, and settled into mismatched chairs that creaked with character. "You're not yourself," Aisha said, cutting through the small talk. "I've known you since we were sneaking into poetry slams at 19. What's going on?" Maya hesitated, her fingers wrapping around her mug. The truth felt like a dam waiting to burst. "It's Ethan," she admitted. "He doesn't see me, Aisha. I'm his wife on paper, but I'm just there. A prop for his galas, contracts, perfect life. I don't even know who I am anymore." Aisha's eyes, sharp with understanding, softened. "You're Maya Johnson, the woman who wrote stories that made us cry, who stood up to professors who said your voice was too niche. You're still her, even if that penthouse tries to bury you." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small sketchbook, flipping to a drawing of a woman with Maya's curls, standing tall against a storm. "I drew this last week, thinking of you, the woman who doesn't break, no matter what." Maya's throat tightened, tears pricking her eyes. "I stopped writing," she whispered. "I haven't touched a story since I signed that contract. It's like I left that part of me behind." Aisha leaned forward, her voice fierce. "Then pick it up again. Those stories were your heart, Maya. You wrote about women who fought for themselves. It may be time you fight for yourself." The words landed like a spark in dry grass. Maya opened her notebook, reading a line she'd written years ago. She stood at the edge of her life, waiting for someone to pull her back. But no one came, so she learned to save herself. It felt like a message from her younger self, a reminder of the strength she'd once had. She thought of her mother, Lorraine, whose laughter had filled their Brooklyn brownstone, now preserved by Ethan's money. Leaving him would mean risking that security. But staying meant losing herself entirely. As they left the cafe, Aisha looped an arm through hers. "You don't have to decide today, but promise to write something, even a sentence, to remember who you are." Maya nodded, clutching the notebook to her chest. Back at the penthouse, she sat at her desk, the city's lights glittering outside. She opened a blank page and wrote. She was a woman made of stories, but she'd forgotten how to tell her own. The words felt like a small rebellion, a step toward reclaiming the Maya she'd buried. But as she closed the notebook, she heard Ethan's key in the lock, his footsteps echoing through the penthouse. "Maya, the gala guest list is with Morrison," he called, and is already heading to his study. No greeting, no glance, just another task. The spark Aisha had ignited flickered, threatened by the cold reality of her marriage. Maya stood, her resolve wavering, but not gone. She wasn't ready to leave yet, but for the first time in 14 months, She felt the stirrings of a woman who might. Ethan Caldwell stood in his sleek office at the heart of the penthouse, the city's skyline framed by windows that reflected his meticulously ordered world. Papers were stacked with precision, each contract a testament to the empire he'd built. But his attention drifted to a small, locked drawer in his mahogany desk. Its contents, a secret he guarded even from himself. Inside was a faded, worn photograph of Claire, his first wife, her smile as bright as the summer day they'd met, and Emma, their daughter, with her mother's laugh and his stubborn streak. 5 years ago, a drunk driver had stolen them both, leaving Ethan with a wound he'd buried under layers of work and control. He reached for the drawer, then stopped, his hand trembling slightly, as if touching the past would unravel the walls he'd built to survive. Maya entered, holding a folder with the Caldwell Group contract he'd mentioned earlier. Her presence, quiet but steady, disrupted the sterile air. She wore a simple blouse, her curls loosely framing her face, contrasting the polished elegance she adopted for public events. She said the contract's ready for your review and placed it on his desk. Her voice was calm, but Ethan caught the faintest edge of hope, as if she were testing the waters for something more than logistics. He nodded, avoiding her gaze, his fingers brushing the drawer before retreating. Good. Ensure it's signed by noon, he said, his tone clipped, a reflex to keep her at a distance. For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken words. Maya lingered, her eyes searching his face. She'd seen that tremor in his hand, a crack in the armor he wore like a second skin. Is everything okay? She asked, her voice soft but direct. The question caught Ethan off guard, a rare breach in their transactional routine. He met her gaze briefly, and something flickered in his steel-gray eyes. Grief, perhaps, or regret, before shutting it away. Fine, he said, turning to his laptop. I'll be in Boston until Wednesday. Morrison will brief you on the charity gala on Thursday. The dismissal stung, but Maya pressed on, emboldened by the spark Aisha had ignited in her the day before. She suggested that you have dinner when you're back, her heart pounding. Just the two of us, no business. Ethan paused, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. The idea of a shared meal, intimate and unscripted, felt like stepping into a minefield. He saw Claire's face in his mind, heard Emma's giggle, and the familiar fear gripped him. Love meant loss, and he couldn't bear it again. I'll be busy, he said, his voice colder than he intended. The gala's enough. Morrison will handle the details. Maya's shoulders sagged, but she nodded, retreating with the folder. As she left, Ethan's gaze followed her, a pang of guilt twisting in his chest. She was trying, he knew that. Her warmth, her quiet strength, had slipped past his defenses more times than he cared to admit. The way she'd smile at his rare attempts at humor and linger after delivering his coffee, hoping for an honest conversation, it all stirred something he'd sworn to keep buried. But every time he felt himself softening, the memory of that hospital call 5 years ago, the doctor's voice confirming Claire and Emma were gone, slammed his walls back into place. He opened the drawer, just an inch, enough to glimpse the corner of the photograph. Claire's smile taunted him, a reminder of the man he'd been, open, loving, whole. He'd never vowed to be that vulnerable again, so he'd crafted the marriage contract with Maya. All the benefits of a wife, without the risk of a broken heart. But as he closed the drawer, the click echoing in the quiet office, he wondered if he was protecting himself or punishing her. Maya, meanwhile, stood in the hallway, her hand still on the doorknob. That fleeting look in Ethan's eyes had been new, raw, unguarded, like a window into a man she didn't know. She'd married a stranger, But moments like this made her wonder if there was more to him than the cold efficiency he showed the world. Her notebook, tucked in her bag, felt heavier now, its stories whispering of women who faced impossible odds. She thought of her mother, Lorraine, whose medical bills depended on this marriage, and the Brooklyn brownstone where they danced to jazz records on Sunday mornings. Leaving Ethan would mean risking that safety, but staying meant surrendering the woman she'd been. Her phone buzzed. Aisha again. Wrote that sentence yet? Don't let him steal your voice. Maya smiled faintly, Aisha's fierce encouragement a lifeline. She slipped into her study, opening her notebook to the line she'd written yesterday. She was a woman made of stories, but she'd forgotten how to tell her own. Below it, she added, until she remembered that her story was worth fighting for. The words felt like a promise, fragile but growing stronger. As Ethan prepared to leave for Boston, his briefcase packed with contracts and his mind on acquisitions, he passed Maya's study. The door was ajar, and he saw her bent over her notebook, her pen moving purposefully. For a second, he wanted to ask what she was writing, to know the thoughts behind her quiet intensity. But the weight of his past, the fear of losing again, kept him silent. I'm heading out, he called, his voice flat. Safe flight, she replied without looking up, her pen still moving. The penthouse door closed behind him, leaving Maya alone with her words. She didn't know what lay behind Ethan's locked drawer or the pain in his eyes, but she knew she couldn't keep living as a shadow in his world. The gala loomed, another performance as the perfect wife, but the notebook in her hands felt like a map back to herself. She wasn't ready to leave, but the woman who wrote those stories was stirring, and she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her caged. The Plaza Hotel's ballroom glowed with opulence, its chandeliers casting a golden light over tables draped in crisp linens. Maya moved through the charity gala with practiced grace, her sapphire gown shimmering as she played the role of Ethan Caldwell's impeccable wife. The event, a children's literacy program fundraiser, buzzed with Manhattan's elite, senators, CEOs, philanthropists, whose smiles hid their agendas. Maya's smile was her armor, honed over 14 months to conceal the ache in her chest. Beside her, Ethan cut a striking figure in his black tuxedo, his sharp jawline and silver-flecked hair drawing admiring glances. But his compliment, delivered as they entered, was as cold as the champagne in her hand. You look appropriate. The word stung, reducing her to a prop in his carefully curated world. She'd spent hours preparing, choosing the gown, styling her curls into an elegant updo, applying makeup with the precision of a woman whose value lay in her appearance. Yet Ethan's gaze slid past her, scanning the room for business contacts. Maya sipped her drink, her eyes drifting to the other couples. A senator leaned close to his wife, whispering something that made her laugh, her face alight with joy. A tech mogul steadied his partner's arm as she navigated her heels, his concern tender and instinctive. These people chose each other, saw each other, and lived in each other's worlds as more than accessories. Maya's heart twisted with longing. She thought of her notebook, tucked away in her study, its stories of women who fought for love and dignity. She'd written a line that morning. She wore her smile like a mask, but behind it, her heart screamed for more. The gala was her stage, but the performance was suffocating. She turned to Ethan, desperate to bridge the chasm between them. She said the literacy program tonight is inspiring, her voice bright with forced enthusiasm. I was reading about their work with underfunded schools. We could visit one together and read to the kids. Ethan didn't look up from his phone, where he was typing a message to Morrison, his assistant. Morrison handles the charitable donations, he replied, his tone flat. They're doing fine. The dismissal was swift, cutting deeper than usual. Maya's fingers tightened around her glass. Fine wasn't enough. Not for the kids who needed books. Not for her who needed a husband. She pressed on, her voice softer. I just thought it could be something we do together. Something meaningful. He glanced at her, his steel-gray eyes narrowing slightly, as if her suggestion was inconvenient. He said we fulfill our obligations through funding and returning to his phone. That's enough. The words landed like a door slamming shut. Maya felt a piece of her hope crumble, the weight of her mother's medical bills and the Brooklyn brownstone pressing against her resolve. Leaving Ethan would mean risking Lorraine's care, the home where they'd shared Sunday breakfasts and dreams. But staying meant surrendering more of herself, becoming a ghost in a gown. As the auction began, Maya watched the crowd with a growing ache. A vacation to Tuscany was announced, and she leaned closer to Ethan, catching the faint cedar of his cologne. That sounds lovely, she whispered. When was the last time we took a trip together? The question was absurd. They'd never taken one. Ethan's jaw tightened, his voice low. I don't have time for vacations. Bid on it if you want. He spoke as if she were a stranger at the following table, not his wife of 14 months. The rest of the evening blurred into polite smiles and rehearsed small talk. Mrs. Caldwell, you're radiant, gushed a judge's wife, her envy palpable. Marriage suits you. Maya's response was automatic. It's terrific. Ethan's very attentive. The lie tasted bitter, as false as the diamonds glittering around her neck. Attentive? Ethan was attentive to his stock portfolio, board meetings, and the contracts that filled his days. But to her, she couldn't recall when he'd asked about her thoughts, dreams, or favorite book. As they moved through the crowd, Maya's mind drifted to Aisha's words. You deserve to be loved, not tolerated. She thought of her mother, Lorraine, who'd raised her to be fierce, to write stories that mattered. Lorraine would be heartbroken to know her daughter was fading in this gilded cage, but she'd also be the first to say, You're worth more than this, baby. The gala's glamour felt like a mockery now, each laugh and clink of glasses a reminder of what she lacked. In the limousine ride home, the silence between them was suffocating. Maya stared out the window, the city's lights blurring through unshed tears. She imagined opening her notebook, writing a story where the heroine walked away from a life that looked perfect, but felt like death. Thank you for tonight, Ethan said as they reached their door, his tone suggesting she'd performed a service rather than shared an evening. Of course, she replied, her throat tight. He disappeared into his study, the door closing with a soft click that echoed like a verdict. Alone in the hallway, Maya clutched her purse, where her notebook lay hidden. She'd written about women who saved themselves, but could she? The thought of leaving terrified her. Lorraine's bills, the brownstone, the uncertainty of starting over. Yet the alternative, another night in a bed as empty as her heart, was unbearable. She entered her study, opened her notebook, and wrote. She stood at the edge of her cage, the key in her hand, but the door was heavy with fear. The words were a challenge, a spark in the darkness. The gala had shown her what she could never have with Ethan as he was, but it also reminded her of the woman she still could be. Maya sat across from Aisha in their old Brooklyn cafe, the clatter of mugs and the hum of conversation, a stark contrast to the sterile silence of the penthouse. The air smelled of roasted coffee and fresh pastries, a reminder of the days when they'd linger here, dreaming of futures filled with art and stories. Aisha, in paint-splattered overalls and a vibrant headscarf, leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp with the perceptiveness that had always cut through Maya's defenses. The gala's weight still clung to Maya, her sapphire gown replaced by jeans and a sweater, but the ache in her chest remained. She stirred her coffee, avoiding Aisha's gaze, knowing her friend would see the truth she wasn't ready to admit. "Maya," Aisha said, "you're fading." Her voice gentle but unyielding, like a brushstroke that couldn't be undone. "I've known you since we were sneaking into poetry slams, stealing sips of sour wine. You used to walk into rooms and make them brighter with your laughter and stories. Now you look like you're carrying a ghost inside you." The words hit like a punch, raw and authentic. Aisha wasn't just a friend. She was a mirror, reflecting the woman Maya had been before Ethan's contract turned her into a shadow. A painter who'd clawed her way through Brooklyn's art scene, Aisha had faced rejection, racism, and self-doubt. Yet her canvases still burned with life. Her latest piece, a mural of women rising from ashes, was set to debut at a local gallery, a testament to her refusal to dim her light. Maya's fingers tightened around her mug, the warmth grounding her. "It's Ethan," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "He doesn't see me, Aisha. I'm his wife on paper, but in his world, I'm there, a prop for his galas, deals, and perfect image. I've tried to be what he needs, patient, poised, silent, but it's like I'm disappearing." Her throat tightened, the memory of the gala flashing in her mind. Ethan's cold dismissal, the senator's tender whisper to his wife, the Tuscany auction that mocked her dreams of connection. She thought of her notebook, the line she'd written after. She stood at the edge of her cage, the key in her hand, but the door was heavy with fear. Aisha leaned forward, her eyes fierce with love. "You're not a prop, Maya. You're the woman who wrote stories that made us cry, who stood up to editors who said your voice didn't matter. You're the woman who danced with her mom in that Brooklyn brownstone, who believed she could change the world with words. That woman's still in there, buried under his indifference." She pulled out her sketchbook, flipping to a drawing of a woman with Maya's curls, standing tall against a storm. "I drew this last week, thinking of you. She doesn't break no matter what." Sound familiar? Tears pricked Maya's eyes, Aisha's words slicing through the fog that had settled over her soul. She opened her notebook, tracing the lines she'd written. She was a woman made of stories, but she'd forgotten how to tell her own, until she remembered that her story was worth fighting for. Maya said, "I haven't written anything real in over a year," her voice cracking. "I stopped because I thought I had to be his wife, to keep my mom's bills paid, to save our home. But I don't know how much longer I can do this." Aisha reached across the table, her hand warm on Maya's. "Your mom, Lorraine, raised you to be a fighter, not a ghost. She'd rather lose that brownstone than see you lose yourself, and you know it." Aisha's struggles, nights spent painting in a freezing studio, grants denied because her work was too bold, gave her words weight. She'd fought for her art, her identity, and won. "You deserve to be loved, Maya, not tolerated. Not by Ethan, not by anyone. You're worth more than his money or his galas." The truth settled over Maya like a heavy blanket, comforting and suffocating. She thought of Lorraine, who'd taught her to write her first story at their kitchen table, who'd laughed through chemo sessions because Maya was by her side. Leaving Ethan would mean risking the financial security that kept Lorraine's treatments going, the brownstone where they'd built their memories. But staying meant erasing the woman who'd written stories that moved hearts, who'd dreamed of a life filled with love and purpose. "I'm scared," Maya whispered, tears spilling over. "What if I leave and can't make it? What if I fail her?" Aisha's grip tightened, her voice fierce. "You're not failing if you choose yourself. You're failing if you let him keep stealing your light. Write one sentence today, Maya. Just one. For you, not for him." Maya nodded, her tears falling onto the open notebook. She picked up her pen, her hand trembling, and wrote. She looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, But the stranger whispered, "You can still be free." The words felt like a lifeline, fragile but real. As they left the cafe, Aisha looped an arm through Maya's, her warmth a reminder of the life she'd once had. "Come to my gallery opening next week," Aisha said. "See what it looks like to fight for what you love." Maya smiled, the first genuine one in days. Back at the penthouse, she slipped into her study, the notebook open on her desk. Ethan's voice drifted from his office, scheduling another meeting, another priority that wasn't her. But Aisha's words echoed louder. "You deserve to be loved." Maya wasn't ready to leave, but the woman in her stories, the one who fought for herself, was waking up. And that woman was dangerous. Maya stood in the penthouse kitchen, the marble island gleaming under the morning light, a silent witness to the emptiness of her marriage. The air was heavy with the scent of Ethan's untouched coffee, left cooling beside his laptop. He stood there, engrossed in a spreadsheet, his broad shoulders tense, his steel-gray eyes fixed on numbers that mattered more than she ever would. The gala's sting lingered, Maya's suggestion of a shared school visit dismissed, her hope for a vacation met with cold indifference. Aisha's words from their cafe meeting burned in her chest. "You deserve to be loved, not tolerated." Her notebook, tucked in her bag, whispered of the woman she'd been, who wrote stories of courage. Today, that woman stirred, refusing to stay silent. "Good morning," Maya said, testing the waters, her voice soft but steady. Ethan glanced up, his nod curt, as if she were a passing colleague. "Morning," he muttered, returning to his screen. The dismissal was familiar, but it landed harder after Aisha's truth. Maya's fingers tightened around her mug, the warmth grounding her resolve. She ventured, stepping closer. "And we could walk in Central Park this weekend. Just us, no meetings." Her heart pounded, a fragile hope daring to surface. Ethan's typing paused, his jaw tightening. He said, "I'm working on the Henderson acquisition." His tone clipped. "It's critical. You know that." The words were a wall, unyielding as ever. Maya's chest ached, not just from his rejection, but from the weight of 14 months spent begging for crumbs of his attention. She thought of her mother, Lorraine, whose medical bills this marriage secured, and the Brooklyn brownstone filled with memories of jazz and laughter. Leaving would risk all that, but staying meant losing herself entirely. "Ethan," she said, her voice sharper now, trembling with a fury she'd suppressed too long. He looked up, his eyes narrowing with faint annoyance, as if she'd interrupted a board meeting. "Do you even see me?" The question tore from her, raw and unguarded. "Am I real to you, or just another line item in your life?" The silence that followed was arctic, stretching between them like a chasm. Ethan's gaze flickered, and for a moment, Maya saw something. Guilt, perhaps, or the shadow of the pain she'd glimpsed in his trembling hand days ago. But he turned away, gathering his briefcase. "I'll be late tonight," he said. "Don't wait up." The door closed behind him, the sound echoing like a verdict. Maya stood frozen, her breath uneven, Aisha's drawing flashing in her mind. A woman standing tall against a storm. She couldn't do this anymore. Play the perfect wife, smile through the pain, trade her soul for security. She pulled out her phone and dialed Lorraine, her fingers shaking. "Mama," she said when her mother answered, "I'm thinking of leaving Ethan." Lorraine's voice, warm despite her illness, was steady. "Baby, what's wrong? You sound like you're breaking." Maya's tears fell as she explained. The mornings Ethan left without a word, the evenings he spent in his study, the way he looked through her like glass. "He doesn't see me, Mama. I'm disappearing. and I can't keep doing this. Lorraine was silent for a moment, then said, I thought his money meant you were safe. But safety isn't worth your heart. We'll figure out the bills and the house. We always have. You're my fighter, Maya. Don't let him steal that. The words were a lifeline, freeing Maya from the guilt that had chained her. She hung up, her resolve hardening. She couldn't stay in this cage, no matter the cost. Opening her notebook, she wrote. She held the key to her freedom, but it burned her hand with the weight of what she'd lose. The sentence was a vow, a recognition of the fear and the courage it would take to choose herself. She thought of Aisha, who'd fought for her art against a world that tried to silence her, and Marcus, her old writing group friend, who'd reminded her that her stories mattered. Maya began researching quietly, her laptop screen glowing with listings for small apartments in Queens. Nothing fancy, but a space that could be hers. She emailed an old editor from a literary magazine, asking about freelance work. The reply came quickly. We'd love to have you back, even part-time. Your voice is still needed. The words sparked hope, a reminder that she could rebuild, even if it meant starting small. She thought of Lorraine's hospital bills, the brownstone's mortgage, and felt a pang of fear. But Aisha's voice echoed, You're failing if you let him keep stealing your light. That evening, Ethan returned late, his footsteps heavy, as he headed to his study without a word. Maya stood in the hallway, her notebook clutched to her chest. How was your day? She called, one last attempt at connection. Fine, he replied, not turning, his voice as distant as ever. The word broke something inside her, not a crack, but a shatter, like glass giving way under pressure. She was done waiting for him to see her, pretending this life was enough. Her pen moved across the page. She stepped out of the cage, not knowing where the path led, but sure it was hers to walk. Maya wasn't leaving tonight, but the decision was made. She would find a way to save herself, even if it meant risking everything else. The woman who wrote stories of courage was awake and ready to fight. The subway rattled beneath Maya's feet, its familiar hum a heartbeat pulling her back to Brooklyn. She clutched her notebook, its pages filled with new sentences that felt like rebellion. She stepped out of the cage, not knowing where the path led, but certain it was hers to walk. After her confrontation with Ethan, his dismissive, "Don't wait," still echoing, Maya needed to escape the penthouse's sterile grip. Aisha's words, "You're failing if you let him keep stealing your light," and Lorraine's encouragement had lit a fire in her. She wasn't leaving yet, but searching for the woman she'd been before the marriage contract silenced her voice. The train doors opened, and Maya stepped into her old neighborhood, the air alive with the scent of jerk chicken from a nearby cart and the pulse of jazz from an open window. Kids laughed as they played hopscotch on the sidewalk, their chalk drawings bright against the cracked pavement. This was the Brooklyn she'd loved, messy and vibrant, a world away from Ethan's polished Manhattan. She walked past her old apartment building, its faded brick walls holding memories of late-night writing sessions and dreams of seeing her stories on bookstore shelves. The brownstone she'd saved with Ethan's money stood a few blocks away, a reminder of the cost of her choice and the life she might reclaim. Maya's destination was the corner bookstore, a cozy haven where she'd spent countless evenings with her writing group. Its bell jingled as she entered, the smell of old paper and coffee wrapping around her like a hug. She ran her fingers along the shelves, pausing at a copy of Beloved, its weight familiar in her hands. She'd once dreamed of writing powerful stories that captured the strength of women who refused to break. Her notebook felt heavier now, a lifeline to that dream. "Maya, is that you?" a voice called, warm and surprised. She turned to find Marcus, her old writing group friend, his rumpled hair and paint-stained jeans as familiar as the bookstore itself. Marcus, a poet and muralist, had always been a kindred spirit, his work weaving the struggles and joys of their community into vivid art. His latest mural, a tribute to Brooklyn's unsung heroes, adorned a nearby community center. He said, "You're a long way from Manhattan," his smile fading as he studied her. "You okay?" She hesitated, the weight of Ethan's indifference pressing against her. "Just visiting," she said, forcing a smile. Marcus raised an eyebrow, his perceptiveness rivaling Aisha's. "You don't look like you're visiting. You look like you're searching for something." He gestured to her notebook. "Still writing those stories that broke our hearts?" Maya's throat tightened. "I stopped," she admitted. "Life got complicated." Marcus frowned, leaning against a shelf. "That's not you, Maya. Your stories. They were like fire. That one about the woman who forgot how to hope, it stayed with me for weeks." His words stirred a memory. Their writing group huddled around a table, Marcus reading her draft aloud, his voice cracking with emotion. She'd felt alive then, her words mattering to someone. "What happened?" he asked, his gaze steady. Maya opened her notebook, showing him the new lines she'd written. "I'm trying to find that woman again," she said. "Ethan, he doesn't see me. I'm his wife, but I'm invisible. I gave up writing, gave up myself, to keep my mom's medical bills paid and our home safe. But I'm losing who I am." Marcus nodded, his eyes soft and understanding. "I've been there," he said. "After my dad passed, I stopped painting for a year. Felt like betraying him. But you know what got me back? Remembering that my art was how I honored him and myself." His words hit like a spark. Maya thought of Lorraine, who'd taught her to write stories that sang, who'd want her to fight for her happiness. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Leaving means risking everything. My mom's care, our home. But staying feels like dying." Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Maya. Your stories taught me that. Write one for yourself now. What's the next chapter?" She opened her notebook, her pen hovering over a blank page. Marcus's question echoed Aisha's challenge to write, Lorraine's call to fight. She wrote, "She walked back to her roots, where the ground was rough but real, and found the strength to write her ending." The words felt like a vow, grounding her in her true identity. Marcus smiled, reading over her shoulder. "That's the Maya I know. Don't let her go." As she left the bookstore, the neighborhood's energy filled her. Kids shouting, music pulsing, life unpolished and raw. She passed the brownstone, its windows glowing with memories of Lorraine's laughter. Leaving Ethan would mean risking that home, but staying meant losing the woman who danced there. At the penthouse, Maya found Ethan already gone, his study light off, and a note on the counter. He was back late. Morrison has gala details. No warmth, no acknowledgement, just another task. She sat in her study, her notebook open. Aisha's mural opening was tomorrow, a chance to see what fighting for passion looked like. Marcus's words rang in her ears. "Write one for yourself." She added to her page. She stood where her heart once sang, and knew she could sing again. The decision wasn't made, but the path was more straightforward. Maya was ready to fight for the woman she'd been, even if it meant leaving the cage behind. Maya stood in her bedroom, the silence of the penthouse pressing against her like a held breath. Moonlight filtered through the windows, casting shadows over the space that had never felt like home. Her decision was forged in the fire of Aisha's truth and Marcus's encouragement, tempered by her confrontation with Ethan's indifference. Her notebook lay open on the bed, its latest entry a declaration. She stood where her heart once sang, and knew she could sing again. The words were her anchor, a reminder of the woman she was reclaiming. Tonight, she would leave. Not to punish Ethan, but to save herself. She crept, packing a single suitcase with essentials, her grandmother's pearl earrings, a photo of her and Lorraine laughing in their Brooklyn brownstone, her worn notebook filled with stories. The designer gowns Ethan had bought hung untouched in the closet. Their elegance was a costume she no longer needed. She slipped on jeans and a sweater, clothes that felt like her true skin, and paused to consider the weight of her choice. Leaving meant risking Lorraine's medical bills, the brownstone's mortgage, the security she'd traded her dreams for. But staying meant erasing the woman who'd written stories of courage, danced with her mother to jazz records, and believed she deserved love. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from Aisha. "You at my opening tomorrow? Need my favorite writer there?" The message brought a faint smile. Aisha's mural debut celebrated resilience, a mirror to Maya's fight. She replied, "Wouldn't miss it. Got big news." She didn't elaborate, but the words felt like a promise. She'd secured a small apartment in Queens, humble but hers, and a freelance gig with her old literary magazine. It wouldn't cover Lorraine's bills yet, but it was a start, a thread to pull her back to herself. She sat at the desk, pulling out a sheet of paper to write Ethan a letter. Her pen hovered, the weight of 14 months pressing against her. How do you tell someone their indifference has carved you hollow? How do you explain that love isn't contracts or status, but being seen? She wrote, "Ethan, I'll be gone by the time you read this. Not to hurt you, but because staying is killing me. For 14 months, I've tried to be the wife you needed, smiling at galas, managing your contracts, asking for nothing but a glance that says I exist. But I can't be a ghost anymore. I know you don't love me. You've shown that in every silence, every turned back. Your money will help my mom for now, and I'll find a way to repay it. But I can't trade my soul for it. I hope you find what you're searching for. I'm leaving to find myself. Maya." She folded the letter, her hands steady despite the ache in her chest. She placed it on Ethan's dresser beside her wedding ring, its diamonds catching the moonlight like a forgotten promise. The ring symbolized their contract, not their love, and leaving it felt like shedding chains. She thought of Lorraine, who'd urged her to fight, and Marcus, who'd reminded her that her stories mattered. Her notebook held a new line. She left the cage behind, carrying only the stories that would set her free. At midnight, Maya called a taxi, not one of Ethan's drivers, who might report back, but a regular cab to carry her to her new life. As she waited, she walked through the penthouse one last time. With their sleek furniture and cold perfection, the rooms felt like a museum of someone else's life. In the kitchen, she passed the marble island where Ethan's coffee had sat untouched, symbolizing his absence. In her study, she lingered over her books, Toni Morrison, Zora Neale Hurston, promising herself she'd write again. For her, not for him. Her phone buzzed. "Car's here." Maya picked up her suitcase, its weight light compared to the burden she was leaving behind. She paused at the window where she'd watched other lives unfold in Central Park, their joy contrasting with her isolation. Tonight, she wasn't watching. She was choosing. She thought I wanted someone who saw me, asked about my day because they cared, and held my hand because they couldn't help. Her hands trembled as she turned the door handle, not with fear, but anticipation. The elevator ride down felt like a descent from a tower she'd been trapped in. Each floor brought her closer to reality, to a life where she could breathe again. The lobby was empty except for the night doorman, who nodded politely, unaware he was witnessing a quiet revolution. The taxi driver loaded her suitcase, and as they pulled away from the building, Maya didn't look back. The city's lights blurred past, each one a story she might yet write. In Queens, her new apartment waited. Small, unpolished, perfect. It smelled of fresh paint and possibility, a blank page for her next chapter. Maya unpacked slowly, savoring each choice. Her grandmother's earrings on a bedside table, her notebook on a desk where morning light would fall. She opened it, adding one last line. She walked into the unknown, and for the first time, it felt like home. The words were her own, written by a woman who was no longer Mrs. Caldwell, but Maya Johnson, ready to live again. Ethan Caldwell stepped into the penthouse, the silence heavier than usual, like a held breath waiting to break. The foyer's marble floor reflected the city's lights, but something felt off, a subtle wrongness he couldn't place. His briefcase felt heavy in his hand, the weight of another successful deal. The Peterson acquisition, closed in Chicago for $40 million, failing to spark the usual triumph. He called out, "Maya?" His voice echoed unanswered, not unusual. She often spent afternoons at luncheons or with friends, part of the routine that kept their arrangement seamless. Yet the quiet gnawed at him, a faint unease he pushed aside as he headed to his study. The desk was as he'd left it, contracts neatly stacked, a testament to the empire he'd built to shield himself from pain. 5 years ago, a drunk driver had stolen Claire and Emma, his first wife and daughter, leaving him shattered. He'd locked their photo in a drawer, along with his heart, vowing never to love so deeply again. The marriage contract with Maya was his fortress. A wife for appearances, no emotional risk, but her warmth, her quiet smiles over coffee, her attempts to share a moment, had slipped past his defenses, stirring feelings he'd buried. He'd pushed her away, fearing loss. But now the silence felt different. In his bedroom, he froze. Maya's wedding ring sat on the dresser, its diamonds catching the afternoon light like an accusation. Beside it, a letter bore his name in her careful handwriting. Ethan's pulse quickened. In 14 months, she'd never left more than a note about schedules. His fingers trembled as he unfolded the paper, the first uncontrolled reaction he'd allowed in years. "Ethan, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not to hurt you, but because staying is killing me. For 14 months, I've tried to be the wife you needed, smiling at galas, managing your contracts, asking for nothing but a glance that says I exist. But I can't be a ghost anymore. I know you don't love me. You've shown that in every silence, every turned back. Your money will help my mom for now, and I'll find a way to repay it. But I can't trade my soul for it. I hope you find what you're searching for. I'm leaving to find myself. Maya." The words hit like a sledgehammer, each sentence stripping away the illusion of their marriage. Gone. Not at a luncheon, not visiting Aisha. Gone. Ethan sank into a chair, the letter shaking in his hands. I can't be a ghost. Was that how she'd felt? Invisible, erased by his indifference? He forced himself to remember their interactions, not as completed tasks, but as moments. The way she'd lingered after suggesting a walk in Central Park, her eyes hopeful before he'd dismissed her. The way she'd smiled at Gallus was radiant despite his curt, "You look appropriate." The way she'd asked, "Do you even see me?" Her voice raw, desperate, and he'd walked away. Guilt clawed at his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. He thought of Claire, her laugh filling their old home, Emma's tiny hand in his. Their loss had nearly destroyed him, so he'd built walls to keep love out. But Maya had slipped through, her quiet strength, her stories he'd glimpsed in her notebook, her warmth he'd ignored. He'd given her financial security and status, but never himself. The trade was unequal, and he'd been too afraid to see it. He walked through the penthouse, seeing it anew. The rooms, once a symbol of his success, felt hollow, devoid of life. In Maya's study, her books, Hurston, Morrison, stood like sentinels, but her notebook was gone. The faint scent of her jasmine perfume lingered, a ghost of her presence. Her closet held rows of designer gowns, untouched, as if she'd rejected the role he'd cast her in. She'd taken only what was hers, leaving behind everything his money had bought. Ethan's phone buzzed. Morrison, his assistant. Board meeting in 2 hours. Mrs. Caldwell's attendance is required. The message burned. Mrs. Caldwell. He'd treated her like a resource, not a woman with dreams, fears, and a heart he'd broken. He called Morrison, his voice hollow. Cancel the meeting. Sir, the Peterson deal. Cancel it. Ethan snapped and hung up. For the first time in 5 years, business felt meaningless, a child's game compared to the loss of Maya. He dialed her number, his hands shaking, straight to voicemail. Her voice, soft and steady, asked for a message, and it was torture, a reminder of every time he dismissed her. Maya, please, he said, his voice cracking. Call me back. We need to talk. But he knew she wouldn't. He'd spent 14 months proving her voice didn't matter. He called Morrison again. Find her. I don't care what it costs. Private investigators, hotels, everything. Morrison hesitated. Sir, perhaps she needs time. Find my wife, Ethan said, his voice raw. I need to fix this. Standing in the empty penthouse, Ethan clutched the letter, the ring cold in his palm. He'd won an empire, but lost the only thing that mattered. For the first time since Claire and Emma died, he felt the ice around his heart crack, and it terrified him. Maya was gone, and he had no one to blame but himself. Ethan Caldwell paced the penthouse. Maya's letter crumpled in his hand, her wedding ring a cold weight in his pocket. The silence that had once been his refuge now felt like a tomb. Each empty room a reminder of his failure. Her words, I can't be a ghost anymore, cut deeper with every reading, exposing the truth he'd ignored for 14 months. He'd made her invisible. The memory of Claire and Emma, his first wife and daughter, lost 5 years ago to a drunk driver, had kept him walled off, terrified of love's pain. But Maya's warmth, her quiet attempts at connection, her stories he'd glimpsed in her notebook, had cracked that wall, and her absence shattered it. He had to find her, to prove he could be more than the man who'd driven her away. He'd mobilized Morrison, his assistant, to hire private investigators, check hotels, and scour every contact in the city. Days passed with no leads, each dead end tightening the knot in his chest. Ethan stopped sleeping, his meals untouched, his empire irrelevant compared to the woman he'd lost. He haunted the penthouse, seeing Maya everywhere. The kitchen where she'd suggested breakfast, the study where her books stood like silent witnesses. Her jasmine perfume lingered, a ghost he couldn't escape. His phone buzzed constantly. Morrison with updates, board members with demands. But he ignored them, his world narrowing to one purpose: finding Maya. A breakthrough came on Tuesday morning. Morrison entered the study, where Ethan sat staring at a contract he hadn't read in hours. I found something, Morrison said, his voice cautious. A friend of hers, Aisha Patterson. She might know where Maya is. Ethan was in his car within minutes, driving through Brooklyn's vibrant streets, the chaos of life starkly contrasting to his sterile penthouse. Aisha's apartment building was alive with color, kids playing in the courtyard, music spilling from windows, a world Maya belonged to, one he'd never understood. Aisha answered the door, her paint-splattered overalls and fierce glare a wall of their own. Well, well, she said, blocking the doorway. The husband of the year. Her contempt was palpable, honed by years of fighting for her place as an artist. Ethan swallowed, his usual composure fraying. "I need to find Maya," he said, his voice raw. "Please. I know I don't deserve your help." Aisha's eyes narrowed, her arms crossed. "You don't. You broke her, Ethan. She spent 14 months trying to love you, pouring her heart into a man who treated her like furniture." The words hit like blows, each one true. Ethan's hands shook. The memory of Claire and Emma flashing in his mind. Their laughter, their loss, the fear that had made him push Maya away. "I know I hurt her," he said, his voice breaking. "I lost my wife and daughter 5 years ago. A car accident. It destroyed me, and I swore I'd never love like that again. So I kept Maya at a distance and told myself it was just a contract. But I was wrong. I love her, Aisha. I've loved her from the start. Her strength, her stories, the way she tried to reach me. I was too scared to let her in, and now I've lost her." Aisha studied him, her gaze searching for sincerity. She'd seen Maya fade, her vibrant friend reduced to a shadow, and her protectiveness burned. "You love her now?" she said, her voice sharp. "After making her invisible? Why should I believe you?" Ethan met her eyes, his vulnerability raw. "These past days have been hell because I can't live without her. I need to tell her I'm sorry, that I can change, that she's the most essential thing in my world." Something shifted in Aisha's expression, reluctance giving way to pity. "She's at Penn Station," she said finally. "The 8:15 train to Philadelphia. She's staying with her cousin until she figures things out. But Ethan, if you hurt her again, I'll make sure you regret it." "Thank you," he said, already turning to leave. Aisha's voice stopped him. "She deserves to be seen, Ethan. Don't forget that." He nodded, the weight of her warning settling in his chest. The drive to Penn Station was a blur, the city's chaos mirroring the storm inside him. The station was a whirlwind of people and announcements, travelers rushing past with lives he'd never know. Ethan pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding with the fear that he was too late. On platform 7, he spotted her, Maya, standing alone with a single suitcase, her sweater and jeans a quiet rebellion against the gowns he'd bought her. Their eyes met across the platform, and time slowed. Maya's face flickered with surprise, hurt, and a faint spark of hope, before she masked it with the neutral expression she'd perfected around him. She was leaving, her train minutes from departure, and Ethan knew this was his last chance to fight for the woman he'd almost lost forever. His hands clenched, the ring in his pocket a reminder of his failure and his resolve to make it right. The chaos of Penn Station swirled around Maya, the platform vibrating with the rumble of trains and the clamor of announcements. She stood by her suitcase, its modest weight symbolizing her new beginning. Her jeans and sweater, free of the designer gowns Ethan had bought, felt like armor for the life she chose, one where she could be seen, heard, alive. The 8:15 train to Philadelphia loomed, its departure minutes away, promising escape to her cousin's home and a chance to rebuild. Yet her heart ached, torn between the freedom she craved and the faint hope Ethan's fleeting vulnerability had sparked. Her notebook, tucked in her bag, held her latest words. She walked into the unknown, and for the first time, it felt like home. Then she saw Ethan pushing through the crowd, his tailored suit wrinkled, his silver-flecked hair disheveled, his steel-gray eyes wild with desperation. Her breath caught, surprise and pain flickering across her face before she steeled herself. "Ethan, don't," she whispered as he reached her, stepping back. "Please don't make this more complicated." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled, clutching the suitcase handle. The platform bustled, passengers boarding, but the world narrowed to the space between them. "I need to explain," Ethan said, his voice raw, a prayer torn from somewhere deep. "Just 5 minutes, Maya. Please." The loudspeaker announced the train's final call, and Maya's resolve wavered. Every rational part of her screamed to walk away, to protect the fragile strength she'd reclaimed. But his eyes, broken, vulnerable, unlike the cold gaze she'd known for 14 months, held her in place. "She said you have until the train leaves," her voice low, guarded. Ethan exhaled, as if gathering courage from a place he'd long buried. "I was married before," he began, his words barely audible above the station's din. "Claire, my wife, and our daughter, Emma. 8 years together, 5 married. They were my world. Claire's laugh, Emma's stubborn streak. 5 years ago, a drunk driver took them both. I was in a meeting, closing a deal, when the hospital called. It broke me, Maya. I swore I'd never love like that again. Never let anyone close enough to destroy me." Maya's heart twisted, his confession unlocking the pain she'd glimpsed in his trembling hand, his locked drawer. He'd never spoken of them, and the weight of his loss hit her like a wave. "So you made our marriage a contract," she said, tears stinging her eyes. "No love, no risk. And for 14 months, you made me feel like I didn't exist." Her voice cracked, the hurt spilling out, the mornings he left without a word, the galas where she was a prop, the nights she wrote in her notebook to remember who she was. "No," Ethan said fiercely, stepping closer. "That's the lie I told myself. The truth is, I felt everything from the start. Your smile over coffee, how you talked about books, and how you looked at me like you saw past my walls. I was terrified, Maya, afraid that if I loved you, I'd lose you too. So I pushed you away, told myself you were just a contract, but you were never that. You were the woman who made me feel alive again." The conductor's final call echoed, passengers rushing past. Maya glanced at the train, her escape, then back at Ethan, her heart torn between freedom and hope. "It's too late," she whispered, tears falling. "You can't undo 14 months of making me invisible with one conversation." Ethan's face crumpled, but he pressed on. "You're right. I can't undo the past, but I can promise a different future. I can promise to spend every day proving you're the most essential thing in my world." "How do I trust you?" Maya asked, her voice breaking. "How do I know you won't shut me out again?" Ethan stepped closer, his hands framing her face with a tenderness she'd never known from him. He said, "Because I can't live without you," his voice shaking. "These days, without you, it has been hell. My life is empty without you, Maya. I love you." The words, never spoken in 14 months, hung between them, raw and unguarded. The train began to move, its wheels screeching. Maya's eyes flicked to it, her chance to leave slipping away. Ethan's forehead touched hers, his breath warm. "Please don't get on that train," he pleaded. "Don't let me lose the only woman I'll ever love because I was too afraid to fight for her." Maya's resolve wavered. Aisha's words, "You deserve to be loved," clashing with her fear. Then, on impulse, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was the kiss their contract had forbidden, breaking every rule they'd lived by. It carried 14 months of suppressed longing, shattering the walls between them. Ethan kissed her back, his arms wrapping around her, desperate and tender. But Maya pulled away, tears streaming down her face. "I can't go back to how it was," she said. her voice firm. "And I can't trust this yet, Ethan. I need time to believe you." The train was gone. Its absence was a choice she hadn't planned. Ethan nodded, his eyes wet. "I'll wait, Maya. I'll prove it. No contracts, no walls, just us." The platform was emptied, leaving them alone. The uncertainty was in the future, alive with possibility. Maya woke to laughter drifting from the kitchen, a melody of joy filling the penthouse with life. 6 months had passed since the train station, where Ethan's confession and their forbidden kiss had shattered the walls of their contract marriage. The bed they now shared, once a symbol of their distance, was warm with shared mornings, its mismatched quilts a testament to their new beginning. Maya stretched, smiling at the clatter of pans and Ethan's muttered curse as he attempted breakfast. The penthouse had transformed, its sterile perfection replaced by vibrant throw pillows, thriving plants they'd somehow kept alive, and photos capturing real moments, laughter, quiet glances, love. The most cherished photo sat on the mantel, their second wedding, a small ceremony in a Harlem garden 3 months after the station. Aisha and Lorraine had been there, Lorraine's eyes shining with joy as she watched her daughter marry a man who finally saw her. Ethan had vowed to love Maya every day, not just when it was convenient, and she'd promised to trust him, step by step. The memory warmed her as she padded into the kitchen, where Ethan stood, flour on his cheek, grinning sheepishly over a stack of slightly burned pancakes. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell," he said, wrapping his arms around her, his lips brushing her neck. Once unimaginable, the warmth of his touch was now a daily gift. "How'd you sleep?" he asked, his steel-gray eyes soft with care. "Like someone who knows she's loved," Maya replied, leaning into him, marveling at how his presence had shifted from cold distance to tender intimacy. The man who'd once lived for contracts now lingered over coffee, asking about her dreams, stories, and day. But trust wasn't instant. Last night, as they'd planned Aisha's gallery visit, Maya had tensed, a flicker of fear surfacing. "Ethan," she'd said, her voice quiet, "sometimes I'm scared you'll shut me out again. I'll wake up, and you'll be the man who didn't see me." His face had softened, but he didn't dismiss her worry. "I'm working on it," he'd said, taking her hand. "Therapy's helping me face my fears, losing Claire and Emma, losing you. I choose you daily, Maya, and I'll keep proving it." The honesty, raw and unguarded, had eased her, a reminder that their love was a work in progress, not a fairy tale. Now, in the kitchen, Ethan gestured to the pancakes. "What's the occasion?" Maya teased, noting the elaborate spread. Fresh fruit, whipped cream, coffee brewed just how she liked it. "Can't a man make his wife breakfast just because?" he said, but a nervous glint in his eyes betrayed him. She raised an eyebrow. "Ethan Caldwell doesn't do just because." "Spill it," he laughed, the sound rich and free, a far cry from the clipped tones of their past. "Fine, you caught me," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket, her name written in his looser, more personal script. Maya perched on a stool, opening the envelope with curious fingers. Inside was a letter from the Whitlock Foundation for Children's Literacy, Executive Director Maya Johnson Caldwell. Starting date: "Whenever you're ready." Her breath caught. "Ethan, what is this?" He stepped closer, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "Remember when you wanted to read to kids at the gala, and I brushed it off? I've been thinking about it for months. How your face lit up. How passionate you were. This is your vision, Maya. A foundation to bring books to kids who need them. You'll have complete control, unlimited funding, and a husband who'll back every dream you chase. Tears welled in her eyes as she read the details. A program to fund libraries in under-resourced schools. Her passion brought to life. "There's more," Ethan said, his voice soft. "I showed your stories to a publisher friend. Harper & Associates wants to publish a collection of your short stories. They're offering an advance that'd make even me jealous." Maya gasped, her notebook flashing in her mind. She'd been writing again, tentative sentences growing into stories of women reclaiming their power. Aisha had slipped Ethan a draft, and he'd believed in her enough to share it. She launched into his arms, kissing him with a joy words couldn't hold. "I love you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This scares me, Ethan. Being this happy, trusting this." He spun her gently, his grin unguarded. "Be scared. Be excited. Be everything you are. I'll be here, cheering you on." Later, they sat on their couch, a cozy mismatch they'd picked together, reading. She a novel, him a biography, their feet tangled. Maya looked up. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. He set his book down, pulling her close. "Thank you for teaching me to love again." Outside, the city sparkled, millions of lights weaving their own stories. Inside, Maya and Ethan had built a home, not perfect, but real, grounded in honesty and love that grew stronger every day.